Welcome to the Small Town Podcast. This is Season 2. I'm Monica Lacey, and I'll be your host for some engaging discussions with artists working in contemporary art in Prince Edward Island. Each episode focuses on a different medium, and I bring two artists into conversation around it and their process. This town is small as PEI's only artist-run center, incorporated in 2010, and we are dedicated to helping foster sustainability for contemporary arts practice in this province. This project is made possible via the support of Innovation PEI through the PEI Culture Action Plan. We recorded these sessions on traditional unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Big thank you to Devin Ross at Thin Slice Media for the sound recording, editing, and music. For more information on each of the artists I speak with, please see the show notes for each episode. This episode I speak with two artists working with sound as their medium. Joe Millar and Somnia Lucent share a deep capacity for listening, big hearts, and a prairie background. They both contribute to the local experimental music scene via the Sound Series Collective as well as independently. We spoke on a windy September day over mugs of tea.
So I'm Joseph Millar, or Joe Millar, as my friends know me. I'm a sound artist based in PEI, Bryce Point, PEI. I sort of straddle the line between sound art and musician, but I don't think that I can call myself a musician. I think I lean heavily more towards sound art. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome, thanks.
My name's Somnia, and I live in a rural farmhouse in Prince Edward Island, and I consider myself an artist and just so happen to be using sound at the moment to kind of explore some aspects of, the time and place that I'm living in and what I want to accomplish for this period of my life. So I've always been kind of afraid of music and sound, but something is telling me to confront that fear. So I'm just trying to explore what sound means and how I can become more comfortable with understanding it.
Maybe we'll jump off from there, and I know you've both worked with other media in the past, so I'm curious how you found your way to sound. What was that journey, and what were you working with before, and did it push you towards sound, or anyone can jump in.
Do you want me to take it?
Sure, you go first.
I actually I started in art school early 90s, Alberta College of Art and Design, as a sculptor. And my third year of sculpture, I found basically a group of artists starting in the 50s, 60s, and 70s called the Sound and Light Artists. James Turrell was the big light artist, and then there was people like John Cage, so forth and so on. And I started getting interested in sound as a 3D object instead of sound just being this two-dimensional object that you hear it through speakers, or you put earbuds in or whatever, but it actually fills a room like a 3D object. So trying to explain to my sculpture teachers that this was an actual legitimate thing was, especially the early 90s, was quite fun. I did end up, that being my process for the last year, my graduating year, was, funnily enough, painting and sound was my sculptural thing at the time. So that's how I got into it. Now there's lots of deeper stories within that brought me into the actual sound field. But we can. I'll let.
And then for you, Joe, Did you stay with it since that?
Yeah.
And then it became a deeper relationship.
Yeah. So it was always I knew that sound was something that I'd always been interested in, electronic sound, and I didn't know at the time that this was, on the cusp of sound art, and sort of led in that way, especially electronic music and stuff. I've quite a history in that. Late 80s, throwing raves in the early 90s. I did design for raves. We would throw parties that were like 20 people at the time because nobody was doing it. We'd break into warehouses, set up the DJ booth. It was that kind of stuff. I was doing live PA. Yeah. I think I started in 93 was the first sort of ambient room that I did. And at the time, ambient wasn't what we know as ambient or sound art now. It was really seminal stages at that point in time. Still rhythm-based and stuff. And I started pulling that away and pulling that away and pulling that away. But that's a whole other process of working that I do. But yeah, I've been doing it. I'm aging myself, but I've been doing it for a long time.
Those parties sound amazing. Yeah, do you want to speak to that? How you found your way to it?
I guess I've worked with film for a long time, like video art, which doesn't necessarily need sound or require sound. So that was like a way for me to work in film, like making video art without having to approach sound. So I kind of got away from it. But whether you're working with something or actively trying to avoid it, you're still thinking about it, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think for a long time I was actively trying to avoid working with sound because there's something that I feel very sensitive and overwhelmed to sound, and I wanted to deny like that it existed. I'm not quite sure why I had that aversion to it, but like moving to the country, there was a sense of ease in the sound that I was listening to, that I thought maybe the environments I was in before were just not conducive for me to feel comfortable or safe enough to explore it. And I think that, like moving to the country, I was able to listen more deeply for longer periods of time without feeling completely overwhelmed and shutting down. And that felt really inspiring to me, I guess. So that's why I felt like brave enough to start exploring it, because as I said previously, I wasn't exploring it, but I was still kind of obsessed with like denying it or wanting to push it away. And I also felt like there was a lot of my friends were musicians or sound artists, and I thought like they were really good at it and that was no place for me. And I just like let them do it because they were really good. And I just felt like I didn't know how to jump in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as soon as you had some space and quiet.
Yeah, and a place to explore without having to justify what I was doing or why I was doing it.
Yeah.
It's funny too when you mention that about like being out in the country, because it's one of the things people always ask me, what do you listen to at home? And I say nothing. I listen to silence. And it's eerie for some people, like even when you're like what you describe is you're there in silence, but you hear so intently and you start noticing things. Like it's funny when you were saying about like doing film and then actively not using sound. It's almost that absence of sound speaks volumes, especially in film. You know what I mean? The silence is just as loud as any kind of sound art that you can do. I think it's just, you were exploring it even before you were exploring it, I think.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Sorry, as a outside viewer looking in, like I found that idea of, removing yourself from all the noise and just going out into the country, especially is really conducive to doing what we do as sound artists.
Yeah, I had that question actually, if the rural location makes it possible to make this work.
Yeah.
If you do need kind of noise reduction in order to
I think again, it's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of sound artists. You know, you have people that really, you know, they need to be in the chaos. The chaos is what drives. And then you have other people where it's, you know, it's the quiet. It's the floating in an ocean, listening to, you know, the earth's own rhythm. Like as soon as you feel that rhythm, there's just a silence in it. That's beautiful. It's those in-betweens that you get. That's the only way to, I can explain it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. So you're both working with sound now, but have worked with other things. So when you're creative or you're feeling inspired, is sound, like is audio the first way that you kind of receive something? Is it the first lens, or do you get it in words? Do you get it in images? I was just curious if you're, you know, if your kind of lens of perception into the pool of creativity, is it audio? Is that what comes through first? Like, for instance, for me, I work visually, but my sketchbook is all writing. Like everything comes through it verbally, and then I make it into an image.
Interesting. I think it's visual and auditory. Is that the word? Words aren't a easy tool for me to use, but visual and sound, really help me navigate that creative process of like filtering through ideas. And sometimes I will hear something and then understand that it's a certain shape, or see something and understand that it could be a certain sound. So I think it's both, you know, auditory and visual that help guide that process, which is difficult when, you know, working in the arts and having to describe something before it exists. You can't say, well, I'm hoping that it's like this kind of high pitch tinking that travels. You know, it's like, what does that mean? So often then you have to just create it and then show it. So does that answer the question?
Yeah. It almost sounds like synesthesia almost. Like the idea where a sound has a shape or a color or
I think that's what's going on. And I think that's part of like living in a big city that was overwhelming, because that kind of, it just shut completely down, and I felt like I didn't know how to navigate without it. Because I grew up in northern Saskatchewan, so I did live in a small town, but had a lot of access to like the forest and lakes and a lot of nature. So when I was older and moved to bigger cities, that kind of sense got overwhelmed and kind of shut down. And then you feel a bit empty without it. And I didn't understand that went away until I moved back here and then got it back, you know? So, synesthesia, I think that's exactly what it is.
It was funny because you come from rural to city, back to rural, where I was the opposite. It was one of the biggest cities in Denmark where I grew up, and all I knew was cities. I didn't know anything else until we actually moved here to PEI, and I lived out in the country for the first time. And that sort of, like, the only way I can describe it is a vacuum being filled up. Like, it was almost as if it just absorbed everything, and everything just opened up from there. It was quite the experience. And to this day, coming into cities now is just, you know, it's fun to visit. It's fun to, you know, go do things that you can't. But you're right, like the shapes, the sounds, the smells, the everything that's in a city just seems to just squash that.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Listening.
Squash, exactly.
Yeah. Like it's funny because with me, it always it starts, long story short, very, very long story. I suffer from memory loss, and I get emotions from things that I actually don't remember why I have these emotions. So the way that I sort of calm some of those emotions is I'll listen to loops, and it's basically like a single waveform loop, almost like just a repeating pattern. Anything in a repeating pattern will just put me into a stasis, and then I can just, everything else disappears from there, and then I build up from that, and that becomes what I create. It's funny because a lot of the stuff that I do comes across polyphonic, but it's all done monophonically. Everything is loops. Every single thing I do is just loops that build on loops that build on loops. Things might sound like melodies, but they're not actually melodies. They're just layers and layers of loops that are added in. And that's how my creative process starts. It's just that within those little teeny microscopic loops.
That was actually going to be my next question, to describe your creative process. And so when you create something, does it start with inspiration, or you're like, it's time, I got to make something, I got to just sit down and make something? Or how do you even get in the door to your studio? Do you get called, or do you have a regimen? Or I think, people always say, like, was art school worth it? And I said the only thing that art school was worth was completing something. You do, like, a regiment is a good way to put it. You say to yourself, when I go into my studio, I always press record. I have gigs upon gigs upon gigs of sound, of just, because I'll record everything, and it's just a habit that I got into. But to get into the studio, it's funny because it always hits around fall, as soon as back to school. You know what I mean? Like you want to just get creative as soon as fall happens. Or maybe it's the quiet time. Maybe it's when you're describing when you get out into nature. Nature is loud in the summertime. Fall, it starts getting quiet. And then wintertime is perfection. It is so beautifully quiet in the wintertime. If you sit on a sunny day out in the winter in a field, there's nothing. And it's so beautiful. And that's usually what will bring me in, is that sort of the feeling of hibernation almost. I want to go hibernate in my studio. And that's what brings me into the studio and start creating. But usually everything gears up. And then you start with a loop once you get in there.
Yeah. Always starts with a loop.
And then you just listen and wait and build.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it is technology is kind of caught up to that. So when I started doing this, some of the things I'm doing now, you just couldn't do. It was impossible. I tried my best. There was ways to get around it and ways I could accomplish those things. But now you can actually, I don't want to get too deep into process, but like granular synthesis and stuff, where you're actually taking microscopic pinches of sound, and they are just looping within themselves. And then they birth other pieces, and you can do it randomly, and they just start birthing these like little loops that change pitches and move. And it's like a cloud that's created from this little single moment in time.
That's so cool.
But you couldn't
blew my mind a little.
Yeah.
You couldn't do that before. It's a thing. You know what I mean? Like,
I just got this visual of like a great grandmother and the generations that come
genetic
after.
memory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that idea is, and it's funny you say that, because I had a huge discussion with another sound artist of mine way back in the day, and I don't know what we were on at the time, but whatever, is that idea of genetic memory. Like theoretically, you know everything that has happened, and you know everything that will happen, because genetically you have all that in you, so theoretically you could take from those and they'll make up what you are. But yeah.
We've been talking so much about time lately, and like feel that feeling that everything has already happened.
Yeah.
And you just have to remember, or you just have to find it.
Well,
you find the moment in the pile of moments, and then that's
exactly
what happens next.
Well, it's funny too. Like if you look at it, like it's described, it's called the stupid, or what is it called? I think it's the naive traveler or the stupid traveler. And it's the idea is, when I leave this place, it's being deconstructed. And as I'm going to the next place, it's being constructed. But if you actually crest a hill, you'll see that the one behind you still exists, and the one in front of you already exists. And that's the idea of time. That's how I personally see time. I don't think that time is as linear as we see it. It's not gone. There's no way. And it already exists. You just have to realize it.
Do you feel like that about sound when you're working with it? Like this,
it already exists.
Finding it, but it's already there.
It's already there. It's all around us. Everything is, and I don't want to get, I don't want to hate to use the word hokey, but I don't want to get too deep into the rabbit hole. But everything vibrates. Everything is electricity. It doesn't stop. That's the thing. And if you listen carefully, you can start hearing it in everything.
Yeah. I love the rabbit hole. We can hang out in there. We can hang out in there as much as you like. Creative process. Do you want to talk about yours?
I don't think it's like similar in any way to yours, because I think that you're like a brilliant sound artist. Mm-hmm. But this idea of the small loops, because I'm not a musician, and the tech sphere is very intimidating to me. I have chosen to use what I learned, like with filmmaking, and it's like recording and then editing. So my process is, recording sound from nature, and then creating a small clip of it that is a loop that you build on. And part of what I love about that is when you record sounds from nature, there is almost a built-in melody. Like there are notes that are given to you, and then you can use that as a tool to explore. So you have a small clip, and then you can explore the nature of that, or like sculpting it for sure. And I try to, this is one thing, I try to not put pressure on myself. I put pressure on myself for so many things, and this is really a place where there is no expectation I have, there's no deadline I have, and I can just go and explore. And I don't record anything. I don't. There's something I'm trying to I'm trying to show myself that I can do something, and it doesn't have to be something that I then present or have something to show for that time. And this is just a stage, I know, and it will pass. And I do think recording is important, but the setup I have, I can bring it out into nature and then listen as like a collaboration as I'm playing around with the sound. And for me, like where I'm at right now, that's the thing I have to do. But yeah, I don't. But to me,
that's heaven.
Anything.
Because it's funny, because you just described the work of Andy Goldsworthy, who's my all-time favorite sculptor. Who just, if a photographer didn't come along with him and take pictures of his stuff, it just disappears. He's a nature sculptor.
Yeah, no one would see it.
Nobody ever sees it. People have come across it and taken a picture of something that's half disappeared. I love the idea of that ephemeral sense. I wish that I could almost de-educate myself and say, it doesn't matter if anybody experiences this. As long as I experience this, I then somehow could present it if need be. But then we're getting into a whole other rabbit hole with sound art. Because the presentation of sound art is still my Achilles heel, and I'm still struggling with that.
I do have some questions about that as we go
but
on.
I don't think that, like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't record.
I saw the look on your face.
But it was like, I was like, you have reached that level of I think that's brilliant. Just to be able to let it go. It exists, and it exists for you. Like we have to admit, as artists, it's masturbatory. We do it because we love doing it. It really has nothing to do. Some people get off on the audience. Some people don't. To you, it's not necessarily about your audience. It isn't either for me, but I've got this mindset as this, when I said straddling the line as a musician, you're sort of taught, you got to be able to present this and present it exactly how your audience expects it. But as an audience, I would rather see something like yours where it's like unexpected. It's coming from the soul.
Exactly. Would you if you weren't there?
And that's exactly it. I'm going for a walk in the forest, and all of a sudden I come across this sound that's happening. Like, could you imagine? It would be phenomenal.
Right.
You know, it would be like the experiences of our ancestors hearing the fairies. You know what I mean? Like this is what people talk about. You know, we're so much about this capturing these moments, photographs, Instagram, all that kind of stuff, you know what I mean, to present it to an audience. But
yeah, I do kind of feel like it's an act of rebellion against that, and something that's just mine. Even though I don't really, like, I'm very private, and I've just started to realize like that I'm a shy person,
right? Which
I think most people would know, but I'm just starting to identify that way. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm shy. But one thing I would like to work towards is understanding that if I'm out there, then maybe there's someone else out there that I could be connecting with. And I will get there. I know that. Because I do think it is important to show your work so that someone else can say, hey, I recognize there's something in that I would like to explore in myself, or feel isolated in myself, and I feel connected to that. And that is very important. I just need to figure out how and when I feel the necessity to, you know, connect with other people. But I think as like a shy introvert, that is a very difficult thing to do. You know, connect with other shy introverts? What? How?
Which literally just described every electronic artist that I know. Unfortunately, we are a bunch of shy introverts with like armor that we wear to like make it through the, you know, everyday life and stuff like that. But it was funny. That was, you know, sound series. That's the way sound series came about. Like Sarah went and I said, there's got to be more of us out there. And the first one we did, people showed up. And there were people out there. And then the ones that we did, it was like, I'm pointing to somebody that you can't see because there's no film here. You know, you realize that there's, we went to, what's that called? In filmmaking, the third, when you break.
Oh, break the fourth wall.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I think that sort of introversion or shyness is really part of the culture that is sound art or ambient art or any of that stuff. Is we are, you know, we're quiet people.
Well, and maybe that's necessary in order to listen to the degree you need to listen to hear the art and pull it out of the ether and bring it to this realm, you know.
I do like the idea of shared journey though. Like that idea of what we do could actually teach somebody something about themselves. Like open up, like people that need to do this but don't know they need to do this. You know what I mean? Discover this art form that they can express themselves in where they just can't express themselves in other forms. You know, how you describe being, you know, frightened of a certain thing is I know so many people, you give them a piece of paper and they will not leave the lines of the paper. You know what I mean? The first thing that you have to do is draw on the whole wall. You know what I mean? That is a little piece of paper. So to allow people into that and bring that out in them, I think is great as well too. So again, it's what I was referring to before, is that straddling the line. Like, how do you present sound art? Like, when does it objectify? And as soon as it objectifies, is it then sound art? You know, this is a argument that's been going on for ages.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's one of the more challenging mediums to present to. Like anytime, like with this Town of Smallwood, we're showing some work that has sound involved, and especially now with COVID regulations, it's like, well, if we have headphones, we have to sanitize them. And if it's ambient and it's a group show, then it affects how you see the other work, because as soon as you hear something, it affects how you see everything. Yeah. And it's challenging to present as a presenter as well. And
it's also challenging too, as an artist on the island, to show work. You know what I mean? I've been in conversations with Pan for probably a good 6 years about trying to have a piece at the Confed Center, but to present a piece, then it becomes sculpture. You know what I mean? And so if you put, like, for example, a tape player playing, well, the tape player becomes a sculpture. It becomes an object of admiration. You know what I mean? This is what you're looking at. This is what you're focusing at. If you fill a room, you have to fill a room with speakers. All of a sudden, the speakers become part of the, you know what I mean? So how do you, James Turrell talked about this in the 70s with his light art. How do you actually make something that's about something that is ethereal and it doesn't become the object? You know what I mean? Oh, this is a beautiful building with acoustics. Well, it's not about the building with acoustics.
Yeah, because even a dark room, it would be about the
dark room. The experience in a dark room.
Yeah.
Close your eyes.
Yeah.
It's the experience of closing your eyes. So again, how do you present, you know, and that's why to get some of my work out, I had to straddle that line as a musician and get it out on a record label and have it as music and basically, like, I don't want to say sell it as music, but, you know, present it as
sneak
music.
it out into the world.
Exactly, you know what I mean? Like, I get to flex those muscles, but at the same time, it's not truly the... it's funny because I'm working on some new pieces that's called Departure. And it is a departure from myself. It's a departure from the moniker that I've been using for the last 25 years to just become Joseph Millar, the artist. You know what I mean? The sculptor. Again, I'm resurrecting my name again, and I'm terrified. I don't know what it's going to look like, you know? And it's funny too, because all of us that are here in this small, tiny, beautiful shed is the idea of art in the open. It's always given as the easy way out in the sense that, well, why don't you do something in art in open because it lends itself to this stuff. But I also think that it shouldn't just be that, you know what I mean? Like, I love what art in the open is, but it seems like that's where a lot of the more difficult, how can I say this, installational projects are put into, where I think that there should still be that within brick and mortar museums and galleries. But again, what does that look like? Is the question. That's $1 million question.
Yeah, it's, I think, an ongoing process. But the more people are making art with sound, we will have to create opportunities for it.
Yeah.
We'll have to create, that's partly why I wanted to have this as the first episode, is because I think it's important, A, that people know it's happening, B, that, you know, we share a little bit more about what it is and what the process is like. And, you know, so much of how you experience the world is what you hear, if you're someone who can hear, and there is a lot of noise, and then there is, you know, there are artists who are taking the gems and taking like the beauty and shaping it and sculpting it, and I'd love to see more sharing of that, however we figure out how to do that. But talking about it is a good step, I think.
But we talked about collaboration at one point in time, like what that would look like.
Yeah.
And again, we struggled with the idea of then it becoming a performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's like, you know.
Are there DIY radio stations anymore? Is that a thing?
There was one on the university. There was a university station here that was sort of a DIY station, but they shut it down, I think, 12 years ago, somewhere around there is what I've heard.
Yeah. But they're like during Art in the Open, somebody broadcast and you just like
tune in.
Yeah, like there was a kind of, you know, pirate radio thing going on. So you must be able to just broadcast and do it.
Yeah.
That could be interesting.
Yeah.
And then you could just like put that number, the frequency number, like around, but not say what it was. And then whoever tuned in would hear it. But
it would actually be neat to have both doing different frequencies. And then if a person would have to be in two cars or pass each other to bring the two frequencies together. So you actually bring this thing that's happening, this overlapping, would be amazing. Okay.
There's some serious choreography involved.
Yes, I love it.
That'd be kind of brilliant, though. I do like the idea of just, being out in nature. And that's that. If people are there, fine. If they're not, so be it. You know what I mean? But
aren't radio stations kind of like that? Like where you could just happen upon if you're close enough to receive it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It'd be like an AM antenna. Like that sort of... I don't even know if people have radios anymore that they use. You know what I mean? Like you listen to the AM dial, and the best thing for sampling, because all you get is white noise. I don't think there's a lot of AM stations left.
There's apps.
Is there?
There's radio apps.
Yeah, that's true. Interesting.
Yeah,
so radio station. Okay.
Radio station.
Okay.
New endeavor.
Yeah, well, I did want to ask, like, what is it like finding opportunities as a sound artist when you want them? I get that you don't always want to present, you don't always want the opportunity, but when you're like, okay, I'm ready to submit some work, I want to share it with the world. Like, how is it just so challenging? What's it like?
I think this is your question to answer, because like I don't even know. I haven't tried. I don't know.
This is like a 0.5% type question.
Yeah.
Like 0.5% chance that sound art will ever be featured. There was a huge show that just happened in New York. What was that? Probably about 6 years ago at the Met. And they did, there's quite a few sound artists that did, but again, it was really quite sculptural. A couple of my good friends were in it and do amazing pieces, but they're like, again, I would go there, see it as sculpture or performance, and was quite amazing, quite beautiful. But on PEI, for example, it's really hard. I think film PEI is one of the closest conduits to be able to do like sound for film and so forth and so on. But even that, I find most of the people that are making film on the island, and again, I don't want to pigeonhole anybody. I just think that, it's maybe starting to open up, it's very traditional. So it's still traditional instrumentations. There's still this expectation of traditional instrumentation. I would love to change that, to start getting more experimental art house sort of, soundtracks going and stuff, because for you're already used to working in film. To be able to add that to film would be, an easier process. But again, there's almost no outlets.
Yeah. Somnia, you have shown. We did our residency at Alberta last year, which was sound-based.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Yeah, and you had some sound in your exhibit at the Guild as well.
Yeah, I did, didn't I?
Yeah.
That is true. That is true.
So this is your question. It's not my question. I don't know.
I guess then you just have to incorporate it into like another thing, right? So have a video and sound, but I guess Joe, you were saying that it becomes not just a sound art piece, it's a accompaniment to something
That's a great word for it. Then that's exactly how it feels.
Yeah. But the residency last year, that was that experience allowed me to take the first real step into doing this. Like, I think in my proposal, I said, like, I don't know how to do this in any other part of my practice. And I was looking for a block of time where, like, that was all that was being asked of me. And that was all that I was asking of myself. And that opportunity was really, what's the word? Like, I don't know, like, I don't think I would have, I don't know the word, but I don't think I would have continued to explore or taken the chance to be where I am exploring now if I didn't have that residency. So that was a pivotal, is that the word? It was really important in my practice of taking the next step and to feel brave enough and worthy to do it.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah.
And both artists this year are doing sound-based projects, which is really
very exciting. Yeah.
Maybe this is a good time to ask you what you're working on right now. What's everybody up to?
First?
What are you working on?
I have been, I guess, in sound. There are certain sounds that I'm like more afraid of than others, and I have decided to take on one of my biggest fears, which is the wind, which is really difficult to record and work with. However, I'm learning that the the wind is very much like a human emotion, that it is very abstract and it cannot necessarily be contained, and it moves around and it affects its environment, and you can see it rippling through and traveling, and you can't often predict where it will go, and you have to watch and listen. And it is reflected in the environment. So wind doesn't really have a sound until it touches something. And that is what's interesting to me, that there's this body that is moving, and through displacement of the leaves or grass or other plants, that's how the sound is created. And I think it's like there's more to listening to the wind than just listening to the wind. It's understanding the shape that it takes and how it interacts with its environment. So that's kind of where I'm at, listening to the wind.
I love it. It sounds magical. That's all those little grains that Joe mentioned, like all vibrating and moving around.
Yeah, exactly. And there is this, these beautiful melodies that come from it, and some really beautiful dark places that you can go with the sound when you're not afraid of those like the kind of rupture sounds that are created. You can really get into it. It's like this internal heartbeat or something that you can hear. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. I'm just listening to the wind, hanging out.
And when you're listening to it, are you also recording it and like creating little loops? Or you said you're not recording right now?
Well, I do record the sounds and then play and sculpt them after. And then sometimes I take my equipment when I have the sounds and then kind of like play back to the wind.
Yeah, I was going to ask that actually, if you then sort of sound it back to itself and what that is like. Do you get then a whole other thing back once?
Yeah, it feels like a collaboration. Yeah, it does. It's like I am, like projecting the sound out, and then there's movement. I don't know if I'm like, affecting the space or anything, but I guess I am, just by being there. So, but it's interesting. It's like projecting an echo at an echo or something. Does the wind recognize that I'm playing it back? I don't know.
I would say almost certainly. But
okay.
Everybody has a different opinion about that.
Yeah. It's like I'm trying to... I'm trying to like connect to the spirits that are haunting me by saying, hey, I see you. Do you see me? That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I think that's really generous.
Do you record yourself playing back towards the wind?
That's what I don't record.
Because I think that'd be amazing. Because I think that within that, like even on a technical level, there's going to be like phase cancellations. There's going to be sounds upon sound that will sort of cancel each other out. And in those moments of...
Well, yeah, I do have an idea for an instrument I want to make that is like capturing the wind and then being able to play live with it.
Yeah.
So maybe, we could talk about that later.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about like gear and equipment and what you're using, and you can speak as little or as much about that if you want to. And with sound, I'm kind of curious to what degree, if at all, is the equipment and the gear and the instruments and the things and the microphones and all the bits, are those things a collaborator in the process, or are they kind of like, oh, this necessary thing I have to do in order to make my work?
For me personally, it's almost the I've been using gear for so long, I almost fetishize it. So I get a lot of inspiration from getting new gear, and I've been trying to remove myself from that. Like, so instead of getting super excited about the new cool thing and, you know, spending money on that and getting that and getting to learn that, it's just an excuse not to do anything because I'm getting to learn this, is just sticking with things that I know that it's almost like Foucault's pendulum, in the sense that, you know, if you boil it all down, there's going to be a truth in something. And I've basically boiled it down to key instruments that I always go back to no matter what after 25 years. So those are all that's in my studio right now.
So what are those instruments?
Long story short.
How many are we talking about?
I actually, in my life, I've had a lot of instruments. Unfortunately, I've bought and sold more equipment than I dare even, you know, we bought our first house by me selling a synthesizer. So like, this is what I did for years. But now it's a type of two pieces of equipment in particular that's made by a guy called Peter Blazer. He's an artist he was in Seattle. Now he's in San Francisco. He does wooden instruments that they call it like postmodern instruments. It's a really strange, they're made out of wood, but they're electronic on the inside. They're analog, but they kind of straddle that digital realm as well too. They're weird objects. They look strange. People don't know what they are. I love them to death. People usually use them for what we call bug music. I don't know if anybody knows what bug music is. No. It's very random. It's very, you know, can go from soothing to disturbing. It's just back and forth. It's very jarring. Like Silver Apples on the Moon by Mort Sputnik, that sort of thing. Anyways, I like to tame these things. So I basically I get so much inspiration out of just using them by taming them. It's almost as if, like when you said about the wind, I feel like I'm almost riding a wave. It's this wild wave, and all of a sudden I just get in sync with it. And that's where I know that that's a piece that I like working with. And those are particularly them, and then samplers, tons of samplers. And that's the way I capture sound, basically.
Awesome. Somnia, what about you? What are you using for items? What items are you using?
Yeah, I have many different like microphones. Some that I've made, some that I've purchased. So like a directional microphone, contact microphones are like my favorite, because you know, put them on anything you want and find out how does it sound like. Yeah. So yeah, there's a wide range of different microphones I use, and then I do have it's a electron analog rhythm, like I guess it's like a drum machine. I'm not very tech savvy, but when I was looking to do the work and doing research, I figured this kind of seemed like the best thing to use at the time, because I can put my own samples in it. And I thought, well, I might want something that I can kind of make some funkier tunes with at some point if I wanted to. But I pretty much, use it just working with samples, because I didn't want to just stare at a computer screen, and I wanted to be able to be mobile with it. And I have a battery pack that I can hook up and go into the forest and kind of zone out. I look at a computer screen a lot, like editing video, and I didn't want to have to do that with sound also. And to be able to kind of like feel my way through the knobs, I guess, is different than, working on the computer. So, yeah, I guess the microphones are really the kind of main part of like my kit.
Yeah, they sound like a crucial part of
it. Yeah.
So I have just a couple more questions. One is, what has been your favorite project or favorite, even if it's not a completed project, but your favorite kind of road that you've gone down with sound to date? That is something that still excites you or makes you feel like this is a medium you want to work with?
I don't really know how to answer that, to be honest. I've been so, like, it's been my medium for so long, I couldn't even think of anything else to, you know what I mean? Like, sound itself excites me. Like I said, I may be different than a lot of people, but I could sit and listen to like a single cycle loop for hours and hours and hours and hours. It is so meditative. It is the closest thing that I could say that you know, as an electronic artist, to come to chanting. You know, that's what I'm listening to. I'm just, you know, so I think the art itself still excites me. I still think it's seminal. I think that we still don't have a language for it. Even in this little talk here, we're struggling for language to how to describe sound. And it's something that has been with us as humans for, you know, it was one of our first ways of communicating is, you know, grunts and knocks and swipes and growls, but we still can't describe it. You know, the human language, like especially, don't get me started on the English language. It is the most brutal, archaic thing that we have. It doesn't express love. It doesn't express emotion and stuff. And this is where sound art expresses all those things. So yeah, I think the whole medium just, I can't even pick one thing. It all excites me.
Having heard, you know, a small section of your work in the time that I've known you, I almost feel like for you, it's almost like an ongoing piece the whole time. That it's not really separate things, but it's just this big wave that you're working with. And
that's pretty much it. Like it's one big movement, I guess, would be the one big piece of art. Yeah, you know, a sculpture that never stops.
That's so wonderful. What a nice relationship to have with your art.
The other thing too, though, I will add, and I'm not just saying that because we're going to collaborate at some point in time, but collaborations always excite me. You know what I mean? Is all fellow sound artists. I love the idea of sharing as much knowledge as we can. I think that knowledge shouldn't be, what's that called when you hold on to something and don't let
it go?
Hoarded. Yeah, sorry. I want to share as much as possible. I don't charge people for anything that I release. I never will. It's just, I don't like that. It just, I want to share it with as many, and I want to share the knowledge with as many people as possible.
I think what I'm working on right now might be, because I'm so new to this, what I'm most excited about. Because I think I've kind of crossed the threshold of being fearful of like not knowing what to do and feeling like sometimes there's a trap that I get caught into when I feel like when I have a lack of confidence, then I have a lack of focus, and then the lack of focus creates a lack of confidence. But it's when you're learning something new or teaching yourself, there's just that moment that you have to persist until you get a breakthrough, and then you feel a bit of comfort, and then that's what you can build the confidence in, and then the focus comes from that. So I think I am at that point, I think I can say that, I'm at the point where I know how I enjoy working with the tools that I have in order to explore what I can like record from them and how I can explore the sounds. I don't yet know how to create what I want, but I don't even know if I know what that is. So I'm just kind of like, you know, feeling my way through, and I think that's a nice place to be, because I don't have expectations of what I want it to be. I'm just trying to have something unfold in front of me and see if I like it. And I've also discovered that there are moments when you're exploring different loops that you can go to some places that are maybe frightening even, and you know you're safe. You know you can just push it a little bit more and invoke some state of being that you might not otherwise feel comfortable getting to. So that's what I'm doing.
No, I think that's a really good point. Like often when I think about sound, I think about how incredibly powerful it is. It will completely change the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Like in a room, if you put on a certain sound versus another, it completely changes the atmosphere and how everyone feels.
Yeah.
Like that.
Like that.
Yeah. And
which is a whole other rabbit hole when you start like looking at it in history of how sound has actually been used to manipulate.
Right. Yeah.
So it can easily be, it can change crowds. It can change, you know, like you can see it in action so many places.
Yeah, it shapes our experience in ways that we really don't acknowledge.
Yeah. And even like, that's the thing is if I could leave anybody with anything is when you're walking down the street, listen, you know, like don't just listen to the music that you have in your headphones or whatever, take them out and listen to that bus passing at that very moment that cuts out the sound of a bird singing and the way it does it rhythmically, like all those little things, a window open as you pass it with somebody talking, you know what I mean? They're little samples, they're little loops that just like listen to nature.
Yeah, my last question was actually going to be, what would you say to someone who, I think somebody mentioned earlier, like, I hope that, you know, whoever needs this medium finds it or finds their way to it. And what would you say to that person who is just kind of starting to dip their toe in these waters?
I think you said it best is sometimes it's frightening, but you just do it. It's a safe, make it a safe place for yourself. Face your fears, you know, I think the biggest thing as a sound artist is number one, listen. And the other one is, like you said, it's just do it. And it sounds so cliche saying that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I would say, I'm trying to even say, like, what do I tell myself every day, just because it's so new to me, is every time you sit down, you might forget how to do things, but just try and you'll remember. Remember that you have a body. That's important too. But in order to get to a point where you are creating, there's so much that we have access to now. You don't need like fancy gear. Like you could just make a recording on a phone that's kind of like, it doesn't have to be perfect, or it can be scratchy or muffled, and that is something to explore. I think that there sometimes is like a hierarchy or elitism with like how clean a sound is or how like what you use, and that can be a barrier to people getting into a certain medium. So if you have access to a phone or like a voicemail recorder or something, any kind of recorder, you can make sound art. And the way in which you go, you can, even if you have an old recorder, you can use that and really explore the depths of what can be created with that, and that can be very fun too.
Yeah, a whole project in itself.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for each other, or are you dying to? Our sound engineer, Devin, also a sound artist, has been very quiet this whole time.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things that we could this could be like 7-8 hours long of just general chat, you know what I mean, about, because there's a history that we didn't, you know what I mean? And you're right, that idea of hierarchy, that's one thing that just pains me, that sort of, you have to have this to do this. Some of the best work, when I said with Peter Blazer, the guy makes these instruments, these were dumpster dives. These were things that were created from throwaway objects. And that's what I love. People are throwing out tape recorders. You know what I mean? Get a tape recorder. Look at Musique Concrete. You know what I mean? Tape it together, play it back, see what it sounds like. You know what I mean? It's all experimentation. Doesn't need to cost a fortune.
I do have a question, actually. I'm just curious if either of you have made any sound art that is not reproduced as recording.
Like in our past?
Yeah, it just
100%. Yeah.
It just we didn't dive in at all to sound art that is sculptural, say, but the point of it is still that it's a sound.
I can describe the first sculpture I ever did. That was sound art.
Yeah.
It's a little humorous, but I needed something that vibrated. This was the 90s, and so I had to go to an adult store and buy a big vibrator that was inside this big metal object that vibrated, and it was mounted on the wall, and it was really quite humorous. But that was my first foray into sound art. So this big vibrating metal tin thing, that sounded really good.
Awesome.
But yeah, it'll never be reproduced. As a side note, this is also for you as well too, but for Somnia as well too, is because it's going to be happening soon, and I've basically gone public, is I'm starting a record label for sound art.
Wow.
So it's called Left Behind Records. It's a PEI-based record label for sound artists, but also focusing on Canadian sound artists in particular, and giving room for the spectrum of what is Canadian, from pre-colonial Canadian to people of color to the full spectrum. So far, there's a couple of artists that are going to be signed on, including a couple of collaborations with myself. But any PEI artists, I want to get as many people doing sound art on this as possible. It can be the roughest, grossest recordings. I don't care. It just needs to get out there.
And so how will you be releasing stuff?
Tape initially, digital, and then vinyl would be because I have a source for vinyl cutting. So to also do that. Again, it's that idea of using whatever privilege I have to try to get more voices out there. Because there's a lot of voices out there that are just not being heard. And there's a ton of talent on this island. So much that is not being recognized.
That's so exciting. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being a part of our community. For more information about This Town is Small and the work that we do, as well as our current programming, please go to our website, thistownismall.com, or follow us on social media, on Instagram at This Town is Small PEI, and on Facebook at This Town is Small.